Good morning, folks. Welcome to another live stream with Montana Outdoor Science School. My name is Melanie, and today's subject is about dissecting earthworms. Our organization, Montana Outdoor Science School, is a nonprofit organization that tries to get kids excited and interested in the outdoors, in nature, in science. We do this through all kinds of ways. We have summer program that kids can attend Monday through Friday, Tuesday through Thursday if they're kindergartners. We do all kinds of fun things for camp. There's field trips for kids, there's science activities, we do a lot of games throughout the day, a lot of fun things revolving around nature and learning about the natural world. We also have school programs that Moss does. Our school programs, it's either we go to schools or classes and visit them, do a little science enrichment, or they come to us at our office in our campus area. In either case though, we are excited to share these activities on the internet with you guys. We've been doing quite a few things lately. I've been showing lots of skulls, talking about what kinds of skulls there are, the differences between them all. I've also been doing dissections lately, which are really fun. All these things that I've been doing are things that we would do just the same with kids in our summer camp or in classrooms. So without further ado, I think I'm going to get started on showing you guys what I got going here for my dissection. I actually have a funny setup and I want to show y'all what it looks like. If you recall, we did owl pellet dissections last Friday, which were super fascinating and super cool. On my dissection tray here, I've got a few additional things that I didn't have last time. So I've got my whole toolkit. Again, I'm probably not going to be using the scalpel. Like I said last time, think the most important tools end up being your scissors and your tweezers. And then these dissection needles are also really key too. The scalpel, I never give to kids and I really don't use it myself if I ever do dissections. I just think it's worth noting that. But I've also got these little needles to help me open up or help keep open the earthworm I'm going to be dissecting. I've got a glove. I'm not going to wear 2 gloves. I'm only going to wear 1 glove just so I can have a free hand that I can touch other stuff with. This gloved hand will be the one that I touch the actual earthworm with. And my earthworms come in these handy little jars. A lot of kids see the jar and they think, oh, it's in formaldehyde. It's not formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a toxic substance. This fluid here is a very much non-toxic substance here, non-hazardous. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to post that. Please feel free to ask things that you might be curious about. Would love to hear from you guys. Would love to know what's on your mind. Oh, I also want to show you all my setup because I've got this ruler and these buckets here to help me actually hold up the camera while I do the dissection. So I thought you guys would enjoy seeing that. I thought that was a funny thing to put there. But let me line up everything, get it all set up. Make sure my phone's gonna stay on the ruler. Don't want it falling off on accident. Da, 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 da. I remember the first time I got to do dissections in school, it wasn't until I was in middle school. So it's really fun that we get kids all the way from kindergarten through 8th grade. And obviously the kindergartners aren't so much doing this, but the older students are certainly getting to do these kind of dissections with us. Earthworms being the most basic dissection that you might get to do. So here's all the little earthworms in their little jars here. I'm going to pull one out and talk about the external anatomy for a little bit of an earthworm, and then we'll get into the internal anatomy, which is always pretty neat. Da, 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 da. I do love dissections, but I really dislike the way these dissection bits smell. Ooh, I want to choose a really good one. I want to choose one that I think has all the characteristics I'm going to be looking for. Let me move my hand for a second. Oh yeah, here's a good one. I like that. That shows a lot of good things on that earthworm. We're going to use that one. Let me plug up the rest of the ones in this jar. All right. Wow, this one's really long. I didn't think it was going to be this long in the jar. That's cool. So we have our earthworm here. The earthworm itself is a pretty basic animal, but it is one of the first animals that starts to get a little bit more complex in its design, both externally and internally. On the outside, you can see these little rings on it, and that means it's a segmented worm. Segmented worms are one of 3 types of worms. There's also roundworms in the world. There's also flatworms in the world. We see a lot of roundworms and flatworms end up being parasitic in nature. If you've ever had a dog had to get deworming pills, or a cat have to get deworming medication, that is from flatworms or roundworms. They're often parasitic. Segmented worms can be parasitic. These earthworms are not. These earthworms are strictly earth dwellers. They are decomposers too. And this decomposer is one that you could find easily in your backyard, especially if you do any gardening in the summertime. This worm is so long. I did not expect this, you guys. However, I'm not going to be opening up the entire worm. Really, the most important thing on the worm is going to be this top section right here. This, much like how in most vertebrates, the important structures, the important senses are all located in the head region, just like that in a worm though, except in this slightly longer section here. This is where all the majority of the important aspects of this worm are going to be at. You'll notice that there's a difference in color, and that indicates what side of the worm is the top side and which is the bottom side. So if you look on this guy, do you see how that end, this underside here, is paler? That's its belly, basically. That's the ventral side. And if you flip it over, now it's darker. That is the dorsal side there. Huh, it's got a funny little groove along the top. I'm not sure if that's something to do with the packaging when it was put into the jar. I have no idea if that little ridge there is just the individual itself. Maybe it grew a funny thing. But on earthworms, you do find that there is a dark line along the top, and it's typically the blood vessel in the earthworm. Earthworms are cool because they start to show a lot of the same organ structures that even vertebrates have. So they do have a closed circulatory system, meaning they have blood vessels, they have veins, things that have to be pumped by a heart-like organ. In insects, you don't see this. Blood is kind of just in an open system surrounding the organs inside of that. You also start to see reproductive organs that are a lot more complicated. You also see a digestive system that has a lot of structures to it as well. And we'll get a chance to see that today. Let's see, what else can I talk about? Oh, y'all probably always see this on an earthworm. Anytime you find an earthworm, this little structure here is called the clitellum. And the clitellum is what helps an earthworm actually reproduce. It's a part of its external reproductive system. And there's actually more structures hidden inside the worm, but they're kind of located more up here. I'll talk about that more as I get to it. At this point, I think I am going to get started. Like I said, I'm only going to be dissecting probably this top third half. The rest of the worm ends up being mostly intestines and digestive tubes that are interesting, but they tend to be redundant. So we're going to see those same structures in the top bit, and I'll show you guys what that looks like here. I'm going to pull out one of my needles. I'm going to stake down the top part of our worm. I only have one gloved hand, so I can touch regular things with my ungloved hand and touch the worm with my gloved hand. If you've been keeping up with the coronavirus too, there's a lot of recommendations online of how nurses and doctors are saying this is a good way to keep yourself from being able to touch your things that are not contaminated, touch other things that are contaminated. It just helps you not cross-contaminate, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is not cross-contaminate myself with worm juices and worm guts. It is sanitary. It's not like this worm has got anything to it that's going to be gross. Nevertheless, I do want to try to keep myself as clean as possible, and my phone and my tools. So whenever you dissect a worm, you want to try to keep the dorsal side up. That's the top side. Its belly should be to the floor. I'm actually going to move it slightly so that I can better get to some of the organ structures in it. a lot of kids will see a worm and they'll think, ah, well, it's all the same inside. It's not anything special. But it does matter how you cut into a worm. I also like to tell my students that they shouldn't feel bad at all cutting into whatever animal they're dissecting. They shouldn't feel bad if it gets a little messy. They shouldn't feel bad about wanting to cut apart all the things inside of there, even if it does look a little bit haphazard. I think that the exploration of the inside of animals is so much fun and so key to getting to learn and getting curious about things. So I'm going to use my scissors here and just cut a little line up here. And I'm trying to be really delicate. So I always tell my students, don't worry if you cut any organs in there. Don't worry if you want to cut things apart and take a look inside of them. It shouldn't be disrespectful. It shouldn't just be a sloppy thing. You're just cutting things to cut them for the sake of cutting. It should be an exploration. But I always encourage my students just to go ham and see what they can find inside of whatever they've got going. Oh, I should have mentioned, I do have a little sheet with me to kind of be my guide, and I will show y'all what that looks like here. My little sheet is something that I'm going to be using as a base to kind of help me figure out what's going on inside of this animal. It's not going to look quite this clean inside of it, which is why something like this is really handy and really helpful. You can find a lot of those types of things online too. I see lots of people are on here today. Welcome everybody. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in the comment section. We're happy to answer questions. I can help answer. We've also got someone in the background who is online ready to answer those questions as well. But yeah, would also love to hear from you guys if you have any funny worm stories or funny worm facts to share. Something kids often ask me is, well, will the worm survive if you cut it in half? The answer is a complicated one. It can and it can't. Depends how you cut a worm, and hopefully you're not just willy-nilly cutting a worm just for science in half, but worms do get cut in half on their own just in nature all the time. If you cut a worm in half, you have to be sure that it survives in the top half. So like I said before, all the important structures are in the top half of this animal. In the bottom half, it's mostly intestines. And so if you did end up cutting a worm in half on accident, the top half is more likely to survive. It isn't a guarantee though, because you are taking creature and you're eliminating part of its structures. You're eliminating part of how that animal functions. But I have personally seen worms survive. I know the internet's full of all kinds of sayings that worms won't survive if you cut them in half, but people anecdotally have seen worms survive. Ooh, we're starting to get into some of the fun stuff in there. Take a look at that. I'll zoom in here in a moment once I get this more opened up for you guys. You know what I think I want? I think I want tweezers. I think that's what's going to help me out here. I do love the tweezers. The tweezers are, I think, a much better way of getting in here. I don't want to do that. I want to use these. So yeah, kids will often ask, can a worm be cut in half and will it survive? Will it turn into two worms is the biggest misconception. It will not turn into two worms. The tail end doesn't grow a head, and the head doesn't always grow a new tail. If anything, the head might regrow some of its tail. It won't be pretty, and it won't be even close to what it was before, but it can survive. I mean, it's just like if you see any kind of animal around here, if it was missing a leg or if it was missing a tail, it can survive, but it's not always a guarantee. Especially with insects. Insects can probably lose a leg or two on accident, but if they lost too many, they wouldn't be able to survive. Same thing with a worm. Oh boy, we're getting to some exciting things here, folks. Wow, there's so much going on in here. I do love a good dissection. Dissections are super fun, I think. Stay in there. If you have any questions, feel free to type into the comment section. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Some more fun stuff about worms. Charles Darwin was really into worms. He studied worms for quite a bit of his life. He was curious about them. He was curious about why they did what they did. He also wanted to know their intelligence. He was really curious if they had a lot of thinking brain power going on. The truth is they really don't. They don't even have a brain. Worms typically just have a nervous system that involves just one single cord runs down the length of their body. It's not a backbone. It's not a spinal cord the way vertebrates have a spinal cord. It is a pretty basic set of nerves. At the very top of their head, there is a couple of bigger clusters of nerves that will kind of act as a very, very basic brain, but it's not a brain entirely. That's the truth of that. They just don't have a lot going on to them. Nevertheless, they are one of the first more complex animals to have occurred in the animal kingdom. Neat. All right, folks, I've got our worm opened up. I'll zoom in here to get you guys a little show of what we got going on. Let me pull out one of my dissection needles and I'll show you what is happening. So, the top of the worm, of course, has the mouth, and the mouth, just like us, eventually moves into an esophagus. And the esophagus we actually can't see here. It's underneath all of these little structures here. The biggest thing you're probably noticing are these big white organs here. These are the male reproductive organs of a worm. They're called the seminal vesicles. Just opposite of seminal vesicles is seminal receptacles. If you've ever heard of a receptacle, it's kind of like an area that will take something. So this is the seminal receptacles. This is where eggs are stored. This is where sperm are produced in the seminal vesicles. And do you remember how I talked earlier about the clitellum, everybody? The clitellum is actually where sperm are cocooned, almost in a sense. The worm will move around through the dirt. Sperm are, I guess, I'm not sure how this is done, but the sperm are transported from their seminal vesicles to the clitellum. And at the clitellum, they are pushed to the outside of the worm where they will exist. You know how worms are kind of slimy whenever you pick them up? That slime is even more so on the clitellum, and worms will actually go find other worms and share that genetic material with each other. They will exchange sperm together. Now, this worm, you might have noticed, has both male parts and female parts, and that is true for all earthworms. Earthworms are what are known as hermaphroditic creatures. They have both male and female reproductive organs. However, they cannot fertilize themselves. They can't make babies all by themselves. They do have to exchange that genetic material, exchange that sperm with another animal, with another earthworm, that is. And actually, funny story, I had to go and bring earthworms to a school program. We brought a big bin. We had soil in the bin. We found a few earthworms the day before, and we were looking at them, kind of being exploratory about them. Next morning, when we actually got around to showing the earthworms, they weren't the dissection worms at all. They were just our show and tell earthworms. We found them in a giant clump. And what that is earthworms will actually get together in these giant, almost balls. And that is where they start to exchange those sperm. They exchange genetic material to fertilize the eggs that they hold in these tiny little receptacles up here. And that's how earthworms make babies. Isn't that crazy? So if you ever find a ball of earthworms, that is what is going on. Moving away from the reproductive organs, we start to move down to what is called the crop. The crop is something that is also present in other animals, not just worms. In, I think, some birds, they have a crop, and the crop is basically like something that comes before the stomach. It just holds food. It doesn't actually do much except store the food for a temporary amount of time. Just below that, do y'all see this thing here? Let me actually poke the crop again. So the crop, you see how squishy it is? It's a pretty thin-walled organ, whereas if you move to this is the gizzard. If you recall, our owl pellets from last week's dissection are from a gizzard of an owl. Gizzards are really strong muscular organs, and they actually do the grinding of food, mechanical grinding, not so much digestive juices chemically breaking it down, but they will physically break down stuff. And the worm has the same thing as well, which I always think is pretty neat. So the crop will hold on to food, this will grind it down, and eventually it all moves into the intestines that go the whole length of the creature. And actually, do y'all see that black thing there? That, I believe, is one of the blood vessels, the main blood vessel of the earthworm. That is the artery that runs the whole length of its body, goes from head to tail, and that helps that worm, of course, receive oxygen. Blood transports oxygen, transports nutrients to all parts of the body, even in our body. Earthworms get their oxygen not through any lungs, though. They aren't so complicated an animal that they have lungs, but instead they are able to breathe through their skin, which I always thought was a pretty fascinating thing. What they do is they are exposed to air, even air that's underneath the soil, just small particles of air, and it diffuses through their skin just enough so that they can get oxygen. And I actually last time talked about turtles on Wednesday, how turtles, I said a thing that I said turtles can breathe through their skin like amphibians. It's not quite like that. I actually did a bit more research. During hibernation time, they can change their during hibernation time, a turtle can change how it metabolizes energy. And part of that includes going into a sort of metabolism that is able to take up oxygen through the environment. And much like a worm, oxygen simply diffuses across the skin. It's not that they're breathing through the skin. It's that they are just exposed to oxygen through the water, those turtles, much how worms are exposed to oxygen through their skin. And oxygen is able to get into their bloodstream if the blood is close enough to the skin to take up that oxygen. So it's not exactly breathing. I just wanted to kind of adjust how I put that last time. And the same thing with the worms right now. These guys are more than capable of exchanging oxygen or diffusing oxygen through their skin in the environment. They have to be wet though. Think of it like this. Wet things tend to be able to stick to things better. If a worm is dried out, it will not be able to breathe, which is why we see dried out worms on the sidewalk and why they don't survive if they get too dry. They suffocate, literally suffocate. Versus if you ever see worms in pools or puddles, they can survive for a time, not a very long time, but because there is oxygen in water, they are able to exchange some oxygen and be able to survive for a small amount of time. If you guys do have any questions, I would love to hear your questions. Feel free to type those into the comments section. I wanted to see if I could find that little tiny bundle of tissues at the top of the head where those nerves are. Oh, before I even get to that though, remember how I talked about this blood vessel right through here? So worms have a very clever system for pumping this blood through their body, and it's located up here. It's said to be hearts in the dissection world, and it's not true hearts the way we have hearts. Nevertheless, these organs are pumping blood. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I bet 5. Number 5 is under here somewhere. There are 5 arches in an earthworm that help to pump the blood, and they're considered to be 5 hearts technically. Again, they're not hearts like we have hearts. We have a big heart that has chambers. Earthworms do not have chambers in their heart, but they do have 5 organs that are helping to pump blood throughout them. This is a pretty good view too of those seminal receptacles and those seminal vesicles there. I'm actually going to pull those away because I'm curious if we can see the esophagus underneath of here. Once again, I get a lot of questions from students asking, can an earthworm survive if it is cut in half? And it's a complicated answer. It might survive. It's not always a guarantee. It's certainly not going to make 2 worms. Although starfish will do that. Starfish, you can cut a starfish into multiple parts and actually have multiple starfish replicate from those arms that you've cut away. They had a big problem with that in old days. People thought they could get rid of starfish by just cutting them in half because the starfish were a nuisance to their ability to get fish or maybe seaweed. I'm not sure exactly. I shouldn't tell a story I don't know the details about. But anywho, the starfish ended up replicating themselves because they were just cut in half and they can regrow their body from that. So under here is a esophagus. It's a little hard to tell though. Things start to get a little messy if you get deeper and deeper in here. If you don't know exactly what you're looking at, it can be hard. And I only do worm dissections now and again. So I'm going to move back along to looking for those nerve bundles that are located near the top somewhere. I'm not sure if I'll find them, and that's okay. But it's always just fun to explore and see what I can find. Ooh, maybe that's it. Maybe? I'm not sure. That might be one. That tiny little thing there. It's hard to say. Like I said, I am not necessarily a zoologist or a person who studies animals, but I do enjoy dissections. So I do like to learn how to recognize these things inside of earthworms. I think it's great fun. I'll be doing more dissections too in the next coming weeks. I'll kind of be building it up from here. We've done owl pellets, we've done worms now, and I will move along into crickets next, or locusts next, and then from there we'll start to get into bigger things that are vertebrates, things that have a backbone. While I'm here, I'm going to show y'all what I do have. So remember how I mentioned that this can kind of look somewhat messy, and I say to students to be exploratory, take things apart, see what's inside of them. The more you get to know it, the better you're going to learn. But I have a picture here that shows a very fresh representation of what a worm would look like if we took a live worm. And you can see just like how much different everything looks in there compared to what we just saw over there. Look how fresh things look. Look at how they really pop out too, and how you can really tell things apart versus on this one up here, it can be a little hard. I actually was studying this earlier, and I think that this is cut from the opposite side that I cut on. So I cut this worm from the top, if you recall. I put its belly, its ventral side to my dissection tray here, and then I cut on the top of it. And I think that this picture of this worm is actually cut from the opposite side because you don't see the hearts nearly as well, and you don't see the crop or the gizzard as well. I believe if you could cut through this, you could see that crop and that gizzard better. Oh, you know, there's one more thing I should show you guys, much like this picture here. I should show you what the is inside the intestines, because that's always exciting. So let's make that one of the last things we do. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in right below that gizzard and crop. If you recall, the gizzard is that big, strong, muscular structure that physically grinds food. Crop just stores food, and it's more of a thin-walled organ. And then in the intestines is where the actual chemical digestion is going on. Worms, of course, eat dirt, but they're not just eating dirt. They're not literally eating tiny little grains of silt and such. They're eating the tiny, tiny organic material that is in dirt. So soil, really good soil too, will have the remnants of dead or decaying things inside of it, whether it's bacteria, whether it's plants, and worms will then take that stuff inside of the soil that is organic, and that is what they are consuming. The rest of it is pushed through their intestines until it is laid, or until they essentially poop it out in the form of fresh new dirt, and it's even better for the soil, which is why we always say that it's good to have worms in your garden. You wanna have fresh soil going on. How interesting. Oh, another little fun fact about worms. Darwin, he was really curious about the intelligence of worms, so he would observe them for a long time. He noticed that worms dug tunnels, and worms will actually pull leaves into their tunnel in order to better insulate themselves against cold weather or like the nighttime temperatures. So they'll pull leaves in. He was curious, well, do worms just indiscriminately pull leaves in? Are they just grabbing anything nearby and pulling them in? And so he did a little experiment. He cut little triangular pieces of paper, triangles in somewhat a rough shape like leaves, and then he started to observe the worms and how they pulled those pieces of triangular paper into their den. And they actually pulled it by the most narrow tip, by the apex of the triangle. And that showed to him that they were particularly choosing the way those leaves would go into their den so that they could better insulate themselves. It showed that they had some amount of intelligence. They were able to react to their environment in at least some degree, so that they could better protect themselves and better stay warm at night or in the wintertime. Worms are neat. Worms are cool. Like I said earlier, they're decomposers. They help to recycle organic material in the world, which is really important. Without decomposers, the world would be piling up with all kinds of organic material that just would have nowhere to go. So worms help take care of that. They help recycle in such a way that then plants can take that dirt, they can use it in nutrients, all very important things for them. Mm-hmm. Folks, I think that's about everything I've got for you today. Earthworm dissections are really cool and really fun. It's kind of like the starting platform for doing dissections. You can find little worms in jars just like this online, really easy to order, really easy to get. I have this tray here, but you don't even need something quite this complicated. You just need a nice soft platform to open it up. And if you have needles, you can use those to pin the worm down. Really fun stuff. And like I said, scalpels in a dissection kit are overrated. Scissors are best, so if you have even just a pair of scissors, that works great. And I have the dissection needles that I've been using, but honestly, these regular needles would do just as good as that. And of course, tweezers are always prime. So if you guys have any fun stories or fun facts or fun activities or pictures you've drawn or anything, do share it with us on Facebook. If you've also got time, you can check out our videos on our YouTube page with Montana Outdoor Science School. We also have our Facebook, of course. Please follow us on Facebook to be aware of the newest and coolest things that are coming out on our pages. Otherwise, we will see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.